Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are unpacking a really fascinating collision between the modern commercial property market and deeply held ideological beliefs. Specifically, we're diving into a recent segment from the Beck program that featured Pastor Yako Buans, and we're going to look at his intense real estate struggles while trying to plant a new church right in Washington, D.C.
And that brings us to the central mystery we are exploring today. Why exactly are D.C. churches facing eviction? I mean, is it just a notoriously tough housing market, or is there a much deeper cultural friction at play here? Let's take a look at how property, politics, and faith intersect in ways that directly impact local communities. All right, let's dive into our first section, a nomadic D.C. church. To understand this, let's first look at Mercy Culture Church's background. According to Pastor Yako in the interview, they are a rapidly growing organization. They were founded in Fort Worth, Texas, and currently operate 8 massive campuses across that state, plus another one in Orange County, California. But, expanding from Texas to Washington, D.C. meant stepping into a highly restrictive, incredibly competitive real estate market. Interestingly, Pastor Yako claims that recent policies under the Biden administration actually created a financial window that incentivized existing churches to sell their prime properties to developers. Because so many churches allegedly took that deal and cashed out, the market tightened up significantly, which made finding a physical home literally like finding a needle in a haystack.
4. That is the exact number of locations this single congregation has had to cycle through. Pastor Yako actually describes his church as nomadic right now, because they're constantly seeking refuge after facing repeated pushback and lease non-renewals from local building owners.
So let's move on to explore why that's happening in our next section: political friction and eviction.
What we're seeing here is a stark, almost completely insurmountable contrast in how the exact same sermons are being perceived by different groups. When Pastor Yako asks building owners why a lease won't be renewed, he is flat out told that his church is too political and radical. But Yako completely rejects that framing. He argues that his teachings aren't political at all. To him, they are strictly spiritual, scriptural, and entirely grounded in foundational Judeo-Christian values. In the interview, Pastor Yako actually noted the specific societal issues that served as the flashpoints for these evictions. He said that when he pushed property managers for examples of what made his church too political, they pointed to the church's vocal stances on abortion and valuing life in the womb, their strict belief that there are only 2 genders, and their active opposition to transgender rights, specifically regarding youth transitioning. Now, to the property owners, these are radical political stances. But to the pastor, they are non-negotiable biblical truths, so it's just a total deadlock.
And this brings us to a really striking direct quote from one of those D.C. building owners, as reported by Pastor Yako. The owner allegedly told him, "My staff won't show up if you're in the building. We have staff, some are trans." I think this perfectly captures the on-the-ground tension. For these property managers, this isn't just some abstract philosophical debate. It's about managing the day-to-day environment for their local workforce who feel directly targeted by the church's teachings. It really highlights a very modern dilemma, balancing an inclusive corporate workspace with accommodating religious freedom.
Which brings us to our third section, exploring DC's spiritual landscape.
Faced with this intense pushback, Yako decided to do something pretty interesting. He says he went somewhat undercover and took a discreet tour of a highly historic, 230-year-old Episcopalian church over in Georgetown. He even noted that it was originally funded by Thomas Jefferson. Now, he intentionally didn't disclose he was a pastor at first. Why? Because he was actively investigating the area for what he described as demonic strongholds and spiritual powers that he believes create a sort of cloud of confusion over politicians when they arrive in Washington.
And that undercover tour led him to a crucial discovery revolving around the number 13. He asserts that he uncovered a quiet network of 13 legacy churches in D.C., all of them over 200 years old, that secretly wield immense influence over the city's spiritual and political direction.
Let's look closer at that in our next section, the Collective 13.
According to Yako, these 13 churches operate under a guiding principle where they consider themselves the collective mind of the Holy Spirit. Now, in a genuinely surprising turn for a political talk show, Beck found this phrase so striking that he actually pulled up a definition provided by an artificial intelligence program, Claude to be specific, and read it right on air. The AI defined the concept as taking the personal, individual spirit that traditionally resides in one single soul and dissolving it into a hive mind. Pastor Yako outright called this entire concept blasphemy, insisting that genuine faith must be a one-on-one, individual relationship, not a collective consensus.
And supposedly, the influence of this collective bleeds directly into national politics. Yako recounted how his tour guide proudly brought up a woman who had famously and publicly scolded the president at the National Cathedral following his inauguration. With total astonishment, Yako recalled the guide boasting, "She's with us. She's in this collection. She's one of the 13." The guide allegedly even claimed that this collective helps review and approve political speeches to enforce their specific worldview onto Congress. Well, the influence of these older legacy institutions supposedly popped up again during Mercy Culture's real estate hunt. Yako detailed how they found a stunning historic Methodist church building that was up for sale. Interestingly, despite being beautifully maintained, he claims 0 sermons had been preached there since March 2020. The building was literally just sitting there, completely dormant. So, Mercy Culture made a fair market offer to purchase it. However, they were flatly denied. The reverend in charge explicitly told Yako they knew exactly who he was and they absolutely refused to sell a completely empty building to him because of his radical gospel.
Following that rejection, Pastor Yako decided to do some research into the specific reverend who blocked the purchase. He claims he dug into her public social media and found that she had previously led a pro-trans rights march specifically for children. According to Yako, the core message of that march was, "We're standing for the child against the parent," regarding a child's right to transition even if the parents object. For Yako, this perfectly highlighted the vast, insurmountable gulf in worldview between the landlord and the prospective tenant.
Which brings us to our final section, seeking refuge and support.
So how did this intense clash of beliefs wrap up in the interview? Feeling strongly about the church's plight, Glenn Beck actually put out a direct call to action to his audience. Citing Pastor Yako's prior track record of fighting serious global issues like human trafficking, Beck urged any listening attorneys or well-funded donors to step in and help the church secure a permanent home. He asked his supporters to text the letters DC to 5990 to offer their legal or financial assistance.
Pastor Yako concluded the segment with a pretty solemn request. He asked for prayers for wisdom so that he wouldn't just act out of mere emotion in this fight. He stated his firm belief that the spiritual evil operating in D.C. is ancient, deeply entrenched, and far older than the city itself, and he asked for the clarity to, quote, see through the facade of the opposition they are facing.
Which leaves us with a really fascinating question to consider. When modern corporate values and non-negotiable religious beliefs collide, what is the true cost of securing a space in the nation's capital? This whole story reveals a complex web of ideological influence operating just beneath the surface of DC's real estate market, a web that seems to dictate who gets to set up shop and who ultimately gets evicted. Thanks so much for joining this explainer.